Today, we are talking about resource planning versus task planning. I want to persuade you all to believe and consider that these two things are different. What I've experienced over the years is that a lot of people conflate the two. They believe that task planning is the way that you figure out what you should allocate resources. I understand where that comes from, but I think that there's a better way, and I'm going to hopefully persuade you to see that. If I could figure out how to advance my slides. So a tiny bit about me real quick. Love snowboarding, love my family, lucky to have an awesome wife and kids. But career-wise, I may be one of the world's biggest operations nerds, and I'm quite proud of it. I started my career as a software engineer and found a passion for leading teams. The growth that we've had in my previous company, Nerdery, really led me to really geek out on this and eventually launch this product, Parallax. You can find some personal stuff on Instagram about me and LinkedIn where all the business stuff is. But again, stoked for you guys to be here. And it's not about me, it's about you and your teams and the great work that you're doing. One of the founding principles of our organizations is that we believe that all businesses out there like yours, they'll succeed when they unlock the potential of their people. And the potential is realized when your people can learn through practice and they know the value of their work and they have opportunity to pursue their personal ambitions through their work. The creative industry, professional services, is an awesome platform for that. We have all kinds of opportunity to work on new and different and a variety of exciting things, working with different teams across multiple industries and regions or all over the world, but it can also be a really difficult place to work. And we're going to talk about how we can leverage some strategic practices for resource planning to keep people in the best parts about being a part of a professional services business, not the bad parts where people are overworked and undervalued. And so again, my background, I spent 14 years prior to Parallax helping build a company called Nerdery. I noticed in the registration list, some of my old fellow nerds are there, and really proud of that team and what they built over the years. When I left my post as CEO in 2017, we had grown to 85 million in annual sales and over 500 people. And it was a lot of fun. But in the early days, I think where we really learned a lot of these hard lessons, it was all about the craft and doing a great job. We may have been just a dozen or so nerds, and we had more projects than people. Money was tight and payroll always came really fast. It always felt like we barely had enough money to pay the people. We were doing fantastic work and we were having a lot of fun doing it. The thing that happened, though, is that as we grew and got better and we did better work and had more people, it became harder and harder to sustain that growth and the quality. Again, it was a pretty rapid rise. The team that we had there was incredible. And going from just a few $100,000 when I joined in annual revenue to sales that were over 85 million over those years, it took a lot of hard work. Super stoked that we were able to be profitable along the way, but some years were much less profitable than others. And that's for obvious reasons. And I'm really proud of the vision of the organization at the time. We believed that we could be the best place in the world for nerds to work. And that wasn't necessarily altruistic. We thought if we had the best place for people that were creative, that people were highly technical, these crafts people, if we had the best place for them to work, the best environment for them to pursue their personal and professional goals, to learn and to grow and to do awesome things, if we had an environment that fostered those things for those people, we would be able to grow really fast, do great work for our customers, and make lots of money. And for a long time, it worked. We were the best place in the world for nerds to work, only except for when we weren't. Again, the challenge of running one of these businesses is that it can feel like there's a very cyclical nature to it. I always say that in a professional services business, in a digital consultancy or an agency, we're always on this sine wave of like too much work and not enough people to do it. And then before we know it, we have not enough work and too many people. And those cycles go back and forth. And that cyclical nature of the business, that kind of project-oriented work that we're doing, it leads to a lot of habits and behaviors and processes and tools to avoid some big mistakes. I made quite a few mistakes over the years as we built Nerdery. A lot of those mistakes were really trying to solve the problems relative to growth, to trying to scale the organization. Sidebar, one of the most embarrassing mistakes I made was just weeks before Silicon Valley made fun of the concept of a moonshot. I went ahead and did a presentation in front of the whole company talking about our moonshot. Yeah, that was tough. But yeah, we made some mistakes, and we built all kinds of processes and tools and systems and backup systems to try to avoid those mistakes going forward. We reinvented the wheel on some of those things. We definitely had that not invented here syndrome at the Nerdery, being a bunch of engineers and programmers, very creative and strategic people. We sometimes thought that we could solve every problem, not just our customers' problems, and we tried hard to do that. We had spreadsheets for resource planning. We had this system that we called work orders that was like a task management system with a timesheet. And we built all of these control systems and breakdowns of work and structure, not so that we could micromanage people, but so that we could divide and conquer, so that we could set good expectations, so we could manage scope, so we could make sure that we don't overburden people. And unfortunately, though, this like desire that we had to build an awesome environment for nerds to work, it started to break down with some of these processes and controls that we put into place. And one of the biggest issues that we had was that we were trying to jam so many roles and responsibilities into one single job. We had this concept we called the software development manager. And that software development manager was part account manager, part project manager, part product manager, part architect, part creative director, part everything under the sun, QA, BA, janitor, whatever it took. This software development manager was one of the roles in our organization that we built to try to address the concerns of the business related to how we broke down work, how we allocated people, how we delivered for our customers. And again, built all kinds of tools, made all kinds of mistakes. We didn't always deliver on that vision to be the best place in the world to work. Sometimes it felt like we were reactive and out of control. We could do better. And there was a time that we were growing fast and working hard, and I was looking at our utilization numbers and they weren't what they should be. We did a bunch of analysis and said, man, it seems like everybody in the organization is working hard, yet we're like not usually going over 40 hours on our individual contributors, who are the designers and the developers and those sorts of people. So they're working really hard. They're not quite putting 40 hours on their timesheet. They're at like the 38 to 40, maybe 36 range. Yet there's this overwhelming feeling in the organization that everybody is burned out. I wonder how many people on the call have that problem right now. I wonder how many of you are saying, man, it feels like we're working hard, that the timesheet data doesn't quite reflect that, and everybody is saying they're burned out. I believe that a big reason that people are saying they're burned out fundamentally is that we're stretching them too thin. Not saying that we're pushing them to work more than 40 hours a week necessarily, but we're fragmenting them across too many different customers or projects or work streams. We're asking them to be accountable to not just one or two project managers or accounts or customers, but we're asking people to stretch anywhere between 5 or 6, or I've seen it as much as 10 or 12 different work streams that we're asking people to divide their time on. And when I say these people, what I'm referring to are the creative people, the crafts people, the engineers, the designers, the content strategists, the creatives, these people who joined the industry not because they wanted to be task managers, not because they wanted to be project managers, but because they wanted to practice the craft. They wanted to be better at engineering or design. They wanted to get the gratification of applying that craft to a tough business problem or a cool business opportunity and seeing the outcome of that. Yet they're spending most of their week or much of their week trying to triage every single day on which task, which project is the most important at this moment. They're often hiding from project manager A because they already promised project manager B that they'd for sure get those 3 tasks that are on her priority list done before noon today. And they know that if project manager C sees them show up on the general channel, that they'll be immediately getting that direct message on Slack to say, hey, what about my tasks? This constant state of triage and task management, again, is not what they signed up for. And that's why your best talent is saying, why am I working this hard and not feeling the value of my work? And this fragmentation costs us as an organization. Based on our research on some benchmarks, we've shown that on average, organizations in the creative industry, digital services companies, highly technical companies that do software product development, and other, again, professional services organizations in the digital world, they're losing on average 7% utilization when these people are highly fragmented. In fact, my friends at Ombu Labs, I think Amanda's on the call here, shout out. She's helped us build an algorithm with machine learning to determine that this is true, that we can actually identify in our product when people are going to miss their expectations on allocations based on how fragmented they are in the business. There's a 5% average reduction in project margin when projects are fragmented like this. That leads to fewer referenceable customers, fewer projects delivered on time. And the one that kind of hurts, I know all of us the most, is more voluntary attrition. People are getting burned out, not because they're feeling like they're working more than 40 hours a week, but because they're not feeling like they're doing a good job. It doesn't feel good to dodge project manager C. It doesn't feel good to feel like you're always behind on project A. It's really hard to see the end when you're constantly juggling all these little tasks. These are really sought after, high value people. And I think that we're unintentionally putting them in a very tough situation. So why are they so fragmented? I believe that most organizations have habits and behaviors that help them get to where they are, that are maybe should be celebrated, maybe should be reflected on, but maybe should be considered as something that we retire. Like your favorite sports team, like retires the jersey up in the rafters of the stadium of the people who had come before us. Some of these old habits and behaviors might need to be celebrated and put up in the rafters. These habits, in most cases, were created by digital services companies that as they're growing, they're trying to figure out, just like back in the nerdery, how we're going to get 24 projects done with only 12 people. And so how can we break down that work and kind of divide and conquer and manage our team across those multiple different outcomes and deliverables and timelines that we're working to? When we're small and entrepreneurial, that's a little bit easier. Often we're like, have really close relationships and communication is relatively easy. But as we scale, that becomes a lot harder. There's also a pressure to keep people busy. We know that utilization is a key metric in this industry, and without utilization, it's our lifeblood. We can't afford to pay the bills. We need to have that utilization number. And often the agencies and consultancies, the digital services companies that I've talked to, they're really focused on this week and next week's, or maybe just this month's utilization. And they feel like we have to do everything we can to keep people busy today, because we actually don't know anything beyond the next few weeks or the next month. And we got to make hay when the sun is shining. That pressure to always keep people busy, it influences us to put maybe a couple extra people on this project at the early stage because Johnny doesn't have anything to do. And maybe we can break down this project where it would normally have 2 front-end people and a back-end person. Let's stretch it to 2 back-end people because we can keep Johnny busy for a little while until his next project starts. This habit, this behavior it has a lot of unintended consequences. We've proven through statistics that when that happens, when the shape of the project gets bigger by people, it often leads to write-off or overruns. The bird in the hand, two in the bush, trying to keep this week's utilization high by putting Johnny on that project, it statistically will lead to an overrun, over budget, or write-offs on the project. Not to mention when Johnny gets pulled back off of that project, when his other project starts, and he doesn't get to see that through, that's no fun. I think another big part of this, and we're going to talk about this, is that we have this unrealistic expectation of PMs. We think that they should be these super multi-versatile people that can do everything. Not only are they really good at managing customer expectations, they're really good at motivating the team, they're really good at planning, but they're also highly technical. They could also figure out how to break down that work and divvy it up. They have BA capabilities, they have tech lead and architect capabilities. We're going to talk a little bit more of that, but I think that's one of the reasons that we continue to fragment people. So I got a couple of questions. This is a paradox. Our utilization is low means we don't hire more, but our people are too fragmented means we hire more. How to solve? What kind of utilization numbers are you trying to target? I didn't include the benchmark in this, but I'll have to maybe share that with the download later. To answer the first question for Brent is, yeah, this is a paradox. It's about, instead of looking at today's utilization or this week's utilization, it's getting into the habit of organization as an organization to say, what is this quarter's projected utilization or planned utilization? What is the next 12 or 16 or 18 weeks planned or projected utilization? And realizing that fragmenting your people or spreading people across too many projects is not a good way to impact that long-term utilization. I think they say robbing Peter to pay Paul. You're chewing up that budget in the project inefficiently at this current stage just to try to get this higher utilization number. And that will come back to haunt you. And when 85% of the project work is done and you've chewed up 100% of the budget because of the inefficiency of ramping new people in and off the project. And so it's really having a more strategic outlook, and that we're going to talk more about how to do that. And my belief is the billable utilization number that I would shoot for if I was running a company of your type would be about 75%. I'd say anywhere from 75 to 85% is the right range to be in, 70 to 85% rather. And that range depends on other things. Are you focused on growth? Are you really good at managing margin so that you can afford to have lower utilization rates? Lots of other questions, but 70 to 85 is the range I'd target. Oops. And so again, we have these, in my opinion, very unrealistic expectations for a project manager. As part of our research for this, we pulled 75 different job descriptions for roles that kind of looked like project manager from across the internet. And of the 75, I think about 15 came from companies that registered for this webinar. So some of these job titles might look familiar to some of you folks. But again, across all of these organizations that we've pulled job descriptions from, there were 24 different job titles in this category that we were finding out there. And again, the expectations of this role, especially recently, have become very complex, and there's a growing number of responsibilities. Today, we expect project managers, no matter what you call them, to be highly technical. We need them to be data-driven in their decision-making, strategic thinking. They have to be good at account management and customer success. They have to manage remote teams across these evolving working environments. They have to keep up with the accelerating pace of change in the industry, all these things that are happening with Gen AI and everything else. They have to figure out how to make these companies more profitable with fewer resources. And oh, by the way, they're responsible for keeping all these teams happy. This is a very hard job. And in my opinion, we are asking these PMs to be very rare and unique unicorns. This is too much responsibility to expect from one role in the organization, in my opinion. We'll get to where I think you can break some of that down. One other thing that I thought was really interesting is, again, we pulled 75 different job descriptions throughout the internet. We thought that was a statistically significant sample. And of all of those job descriptions, we only found 4 organizations that were expecting people in this role to have any type of resource management, resource planning, or forecasting as part of their job. I think that's very telling about the state of the industry and what the big opportunity is. Katie, one of my former coworkers, was pictured there, and she looks really good as a unicorn. Our product team has worked with our CS team here at Parallax to really understand this role, whether you call it a project manager, a digital project manager, a strategic account person, whatever, this role that kind of has a hand in kind of directing the work to be done. We've done a lot of research on this. And one of the frameworks that we use to really understand that persona is the jobs to be done framework. And the functional jobs are very easy to understand. This is the stuff that they do day to manage projects from when we initiate them to when we close them out. But one thing that has really helped us as we really try to understand this persona is to think not about just those functional jobs, but what are the emotional jobs of the project manager? What does that person have to do every day for their own well-being as a human and for the well-being of the team? What are the emotional things that we're asking them to do every day? I'm not going to drain the bullets on here. We can give you this slide as a takeaway, but I think thinking about what those emotional things are, and on top of that, what are the peak moments in a digital project manager's career and role? What are the things that they're doing on a frequent basis that really make them feel like they're doing a great job, that makes them more engaged, more motivated, and feeling gratification? Those emotional jobs are opportunities for us to find those peak moments or avoid the big pain points. Those peak moments are why the project manager got into this job. Now, they're different from the designers. They're different from the engineers. They want to see the team that they assembled work efficiently and cohesively. They want to be seen as a person who's strategic and valuable and can get things done without causing a bunch of friction. They want to be known as someone who like proactively addresses risks so that people aren't working weekends. They want to be able to maintain team's focus and morale. But she feels like she is this broker of competing priorities. She's juggling between the customer and whomever sold this and the operations leader, the people that are doing the work, these craftspeople on the front line. She feels like she's responsible for everything, yet not in control. The bosses or the resource planners could say, we're going to yank these 2-3 people from your program because this other new customer just came in. Or maybe the team did a bunch of work over the last 3 weeks and didn't record it properly to the tasks, and all of a sudden the budget has inflated. She sometimes feels like she's the only adult in the room and that she's losing this battle to burnout, not just her own burnout, but the burnout of her team. She's the one who is in control of what they're focused on, supposedly, yet, or I should say, responsible for what they're focused on and what they're doing, yet she has no control. What she wants is to feel controlled and prepared. She wants to know that we're going to be able to do a great job. And she wants to be known for leading great work. She wants to be recognized for this awesome outcome we had for the customer. She wants to feel valued and respected in the organization, with her team, and with the customers. And she wants to see that team that she's leading on her program or project engaged and having fun. She doesn't want to be the bad cop that says, y'all got to work the weekend. She doesn't want to be the bearer of bad news that we're way over budget. She doesn't want to be the person who's arguing with the customer to pay more because it's taken us more time, even though she can't maybe articulate exactly where the scope creep was. She wants to feel like she's doing a great job. So why is it so fragmented? Why does the PM feel that way? I believe that most organizations that are experiencing a lot of these pains, again, they've asked way too much of that project manager. And I think in some cases also that project manager is asking too much of herself. I think these type A project managers that desire for control leads us to believing that the only way to do a great job in digital is to break down our work in tasks and then figure out how to manage our team's capacity based on the number of tasks they're assigned and the number of hours in those tasks and summing them up. And so this resourcing by work breakdown structure, resourcing by tasks, is a really bad habit that leads to a lot of those things that we were talking about. If we could help the organization and those project managers decouple those two things and treat resource management on their project different from work breakdown, we think that there can be a lot more success in these programs. So what do I mean by work breakdown? That might be a new term to some people out there, but I don't want to refer only to like tasks, whether you're using ClickUp or Asana or Jira or Workday or Teams, whatever you're using to manage the work to be done for a individual contributor, a creative, an engineer, whatever that like project management tool is, and however you want to break down that work. It could be waterfall or Kanban or Scrum or Agile or Lean, whatever. That part doesn't matter to me, I don't think. That's your craft as a project manager and how you're breaking down the work, how your team is breaking down that work. This work breakdown is focused on those deliverables and tasks to be done. It's detailed and highly variable. It requires some subject matter knowledge, meaning that like we can't expect all of our project managers or project leads to know the technology or the architecture or the strategy for creative. We shouldn't expect them to know that as well as some of the people on our team. And so it requires that subject matter expertise in order to do that breakdown. And it's really hard to plan out more than a few weeks. It's a lot of work to go create all those tasks or those stories. And that's why some of those like more iterative and agile methodologies have focused on those 2-week rhythms. But from what I've seen, even if you are more traditional Kanban or waterfall, it's very uncommon to be able to have that work broken down for your team and assigned out beyond the next couple of weeks, because it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of thought. And so again, it's hard to plan beyond a few weeks. And again, there's dozens of methodologies. It doesn't matter which one you use. But what's different about resource planning should be focused on the people. What kind of people do I need, when, and at what level of commitment for how long? Do I need a programmer half-time for 6 weeks? Do I need a creative for full-time for 3 weeks? Do I need a quality assurance engineer to have start out maybe full-time and then ramp into about half-time as the project continues? Generally speaking, like, how much effort are we going to take from these different roles on this project over time? If we can start thinking about it that way from a resource planning perspective, these allocations, it should be a heck of a lot easier to plan beyond those next 2 weeks. Now, is it going to be as precise as the work breakdown in your tasks? No, we shouldn't expect it to be. But could we say we, generally speaking, are going to need a programmer full-time for 12 weeks? Yeah. What if we're splitting our programmers between 2 projects? Then maybe it's 50-50. But generally speaking, we should be able to say, for the duration of the program, who do we need? What kind of people do we need? At what allocation? For how long? It's meant to be, again, easy to adjust every single week as we see what's actually happening compared to what we planned. It is not meant to be precise. And it's meant to be a baseline that we adjust from with a feedback loop. If you imagine once a week, we're looking at these plans and we're seeing that the actual time entries compared to the planned time entries are off. That's an opportunity for a conversation. Okay, you've been allocated at 40 hours a week and you've been putting in about 35. What can I expect going forward? And they might say, oh, I'm on a little maintenance project. If I had 10 hours a week to work on that, that might even be better. But then I promise you I can get a really solid 30 on your program. A simple conversation like that could be adjusted for the duration of the program, and we could figure out how to get the rest of that work done. Maybe that's asking another member of the team to ramp up a little bit. Maybe that's stretching out the timeline for that role. Who knows? But with this feedback loop every week, we can see those trends over time as a project manager and have a discussion with the team to see if we should adjust our plan going forward. Again, this takes a different approach than how we've done it before. Instead of breaking down all my tasks in Asana or ClickUp and then summing up those tasks to say, oh, I got 200 hours of work and then peanut buttering that 200 hours of work over time, we're asking people to decouple those things. And we're also asking for other people on the program to step up and take on part of the responsibility that in the past we've expected too much from in the project lead. And so maybe there's a technical or creative person who's the lead on that project, maybe one of each, who should be better equipped and have better subject matter expertise to help us break down that work. And so while the project manager is really working to ensure that we have the right people allocated at the right bandwidth to make sure that we complete the project in budget, we have this technical person on the other side that says, let's see about how we can like manage this big scope of work that we're trying to do and break it down into smaller pieces that we can divide up amongst those team members that we've been allocated. And again, there's some details here. I don't need to drain them, but the idea is that we start a new habit, a new behavior, that just once a week, we have a meeting, we have a discussion, and we say, hey, like project manager asks the team, looks like we're burning hotter, or maybe we're burning lighter than we expected in our resource plans. It looks like the tasks that you guys have laid out are getting completed on time. What should I think for each of these individuals of how much more or less time they're going to need for the duration of the project? Do we have all the right resources? How do those like resource allocations line up to the technical or creative lead, how you've divvied up those tasks and the velocity at which we're completing some of those things? Again, let's separate some of those concerns. Resource management doesn't need to be as precise as our tasks are. Resource management can go a lot further out in the future because of that lack of necessity of precision. Tasks could be very technical. They could be very detailed. They could be and they don't need to be defined out beyond a couple of weeks to make sure that we're successful in the program. Again, whether you're waterfall or agile, you can build those tasks as you go, as long as you're managing that resource plan and the budget on that like lower fidelity, longer timeline perspective. So again, on these weekly update meetings, imagine you've got the team in the room and you're looking at the project plan and you're looking at the task plan and you're having a dialogue about how those match up. Somebody asked, what if all you can do is plan out a few weeks? The team doesn't know what's coming down the line in a month from now. I get that question quite a bit. And the answer is different based on the type of business that you're in. A lot of times people ask that question when they're on retainer, when they have an agreement with their customer that they're going to do a certain amount of work over each period, and that work is TBD. This is exactly why resource planning should be separate from task planning. It is, in your case, it sounds, this anonymous person asked, in your case, it is literally impossible to define those tasks. Yet, you know what the agreement you had with the customer is, right? That we have a certain amount of hours in the budget every month, right? In most cases. And you might have a fraction of your business, say like maybe half your business is on these more like retainer type opportunities. You can still guess at what these allocations should be across each of these retainers, right? Let's not think about it as a budget. Let's not think about it as like a written in stone plan. Let's think about our resource allocations as a forecast. Here's what we expect based on the language and the agreement and the intent of the agreement. Here's what we expect based on like past historical performance, like who have we been using at what fraction of their time to run this engagement or work this engagement. And what have you done for me lately? What have the last 3 weeks looked like in trend? If we're just thinking about that resource plan as a forecast, not something that's written in stone, something that we're not trying to get super precise down to the hour per day, but generally, is it 10 hours a week, 5 hours a week, 40 hours a week for that person? And making that a forecast for the duration of the engagement that you're going to keep adjusting as you see what happens. That's the whole point of decoupling these things. Brian kind of said that he loves and agrees with the leaders on the team stepping up. To him, it points out the level of trust they want on the team. Superhero employees, although great, can be limiting and get overburdened. I thank you for pointing that out, Brian. I think that's exactly what I mean. I think this, again, this project manager, this DPM, she wants to be the superhero, but she needs to ask for help. She needs to empower these other folks on their team. And so again, I already went into this. I got ahead of myself a little bit, and forgive me for putting a screenshot of Parallax in here, but the way that I would think about it if I was a PM, whether you use a spreadsheet or a different resource planning tool or Parallax, again, you're guessing at what those allocations are based on what you understand the need of this project or program is, the agreement is, and past performance. And so you're going to compare like what was planned to what actually happened, and you're going to adjust your plan accordingly. And maybe in parallel to that, you've got something like what I pictured here is Asana, where you're talking to the team and you're pulling those two screens up together and saying, how do they match? Where are the gaps? A big challenge in making this happen for a lot of the organizations that I've worked with over the years is this like natural tendency for those project management type people to be precise. Again, she wants to feel in control. She wants to set really good expectations. She has the experience of having a lot of clarity in those expectations, leading to better outcomes. But I think that what I learned in running Nerdery, because we started out this way too, we broke every single project down to very precise tasks. And for every single project, we thought, man, we're not trying to micromanage, but we want to be very clear on what the scope of the task is and what hours we think it's going to take to do that work. And a couple of things that we realized, which helped us move to more resource planning based on allocation and duration, was that a big part of us wanting to break down those tasks was this idea that someday we could go back and do some analysis and look at which of the tasks were planned over or under compared to the actuals. And after maybe 7 years of doing this, I can't remember one time which we actually did that. And we actually went back and said, yeah, were these tasks planned correctly or not? We wanted to put some controls in place so that people had to request more time on these tasks, so they wouldn't just go over budget on these little tasks without some guidance or from some scope creep. But what we found was usually by the time that we could catch something that went over budget on a task, it was too late to get any budget approved or to give any guidance to that engineer or designer. And so it really just felt more like punitive action than any opportunity to coach. And the third thing that I thought was really powerful is one of my smarter engineers came to me and said, hey, Tom, let me ask you a question. If you're a project manager and you have a 3-hour task, how often are you going to get upset if the engineer or designer spent 4 hours on it? And I'm like, I doubt they'll ever get upset. That seems pretty reasonable to me. You can't plan everything perfectly. And then he said, okay, but that's 33% more than was planned. Like, how upset are you going to be, Tom, if there's that same deviation across all of the tasks on the project? And majority of that deviation is going to be on the upside, not the downside. Putting that into perspective was huge for us. To, oh my gosh, yeah, like on a small micro level, this one hour difference isn't a big deal. But if every 3-hour task was 1 hour more, that's a 33% over scope, over budget that we're going to go. And so do we need to micromanage even more on those little tasks? Or could we see those hours in the task more as guidance? And what we're really looking for on variance is how many hours we planned per week for that person and how many hours a week they actually did. And then say, hey, are you getting all the tasks done that you need to do in the order that you need to do them? Or are you running the right sprints? And is your velocity correct? However, we're breaking down that work. And how does that line up to their over and under on a week basis? All of a sudden, that like fidelity was much lower, but it made it much easier for us to be very active in a feedback loop. It made it easier for us to coach further out because our resource plans went to the end of the project. Bubbled up to the whole organization, that meant our forecast went from 1 or 2 weeks to 6, 12, 18, 24 weeks. All of a sudden, we felt like we had control of our own destiny. We felt like we weren't as reactive anymore. That roller coaster of too much work, not enough work, started to smooth out and start going up and to the right. And it all starts at the front line with these people who are responsible for running our programs, our digital projects, and helping them feel more empowered to act as part of the forecasting team, to help them feel not so responsible for all of these things that are outside of their control, but more of a coach and a strategic leader on this project. Again, one of the things that stood in our way of getting it done, and I see it stand in the way of a lot of folks getting this done, is they really have to ask those project managers to think differently, because a lot of them are type A, very detail oriented, they want control. And so you have to help them understand that, like, precision can be the enemy of accuracy, because it's really hard to be as precise as they want to be down to that task level on a very consistent cadence and a very frequent cadence for feedback. It's just way too hard to have that level of frequency, consistency, and quality with that very small, precise planning. Someone much smarter than me was much more concise and said that he'd rather be approximately right than precisely wrong. This precision over accuracy conundrum is a big challenge for digital PMs. But if they start to think of their resource plans more like a forecast, more like an allocation that will plan to and have a feedback loop to check against, I think that helps them to decouple that expectation of fidelity that they have for tasks. And so what benefits do we get out of it? For that project manager, I think they'll be less stressed out. They'll feel less like they're the only adults in the room. They'll feel more strategic. They'll feel more impactful. They'll have better foresight so that they can avoid some of the challenges that they see in front of them. I think when we elevate these technical or creative leads on the project, we can better leverage their strengths, make it more of a partnership and a collaboration, less of a single point of failure. And I think it'll help us be more flexible. If we can put that foresight out in our resource plans, and we have that across our entire portfolio, again, we can see some of these challenges of overlap resources or underutilized resources before they hit this week. We can start to look at planned utilization that's 6, 12, 24 weeks out and start to impact that like sine wave before the week has arrived. Maybe that's focusing on new business, maybe that's focusing on recruiting, but doing whatever we need to do before we're worried about the utilization number for this week and whether or not Johnny has enough work to do. And so it does require change to adopt these new principles. It does require some work to elevate those tech or creative leads on the program, to come up with this new program process for us to collaborate. And is it worth it? Is it worth all the work? Is the juice worth the squeeze, as I like to say? And I guess it is to me, but only if you like money and your team. You'll have better utilization, you'll have fewer write-offs and overruns, you'll have better project margin, you'll have projects more frequently delivered on time, you'll have more referenceable customers, you'll have your high-value talent saying, I'm so proud of my team and the awesome work that we're doing. And few of them are going to vote with their feet and leave. That's it. That is my story. I'm sticking to it, but I am open to more questions. And so I think we've answered everything in the Q&A right now. Please feel free to add more. Oh, wait, I missed a couple. Let me read this latest one. Okay. Yeah, James, I think very clearly and concisely articulates what I'm trying to communicate here. It sounds like what James is doing is plots out those roles and responsibilities for the full duration of the project at a allocation level. I like to use 10, 20, 40 hours a week. And then for the duration of the project, that might go up and down for any individual or role. And then separately, you work with your tech lead or your creative lead to say, okay, in your base camp or Asana or whatever, here's the time allocated for your team members. You're responsible for helping make sure that they have the shovel-ready work, if you will, assigned to them in tasks or in stories or in however you want to track that for the next few weeks so that they have enough work to do based on the allocation I've set. Again, if you guys read in the Q&A, he was much more articulate than I am and concise. Yeah, Patrick says that we spend a lot of time building redundancy on projects, onboarding multiple people. It sure sounds like we'd be better off accepting less redundancy, living with preventing redundancy coverage in order to prevent fragmentation. I 100% agree. I've seen this show its head in a number of different ways. One of the things is that redundancy that you talked about, like maybe I want to have 2 or 3 or 4 creatives in case somebody gets sick or in case some other project creeps back up from the past that person, one of the people needs to jump off on. I think that when the number of people on a project increases, it is very likely that the overrun and the write-off is going to also increase. And when I say the number of people increases from the optimal resource plan, you've done this before, the kind of shape we like to say of a web development program or a SEO program or SEM program, those kind of shapes of people over time. Anytime you deviate that shape to make it more people in order for redundancy, there's a very strong correlation to budget overruns. And again, typically you're trying to protect today's utilization, but it ends up costing you in written off work later. If resource allocations are a forecast, then the comparison to actuals isn't really important, is it? Of course, you want to go back and revise for the future. I disagree with that statement. I think that the thing about forecasting is that it's hard. And it is one of those things that you can get really good at with some practice. It is also one of those things, just like a lot of things, that without feedback, you're not going to get better. And so if you think about like just one person on one program and said, maybe you've resource allocated this person to 20 hours a week. Every week, the actuals she enters on her timesheet is an opportunity for you to get feedback whether or not we've allocated enough time. If 3 weeks in, she continues to be showing you that you had allocated or forecast 20 and she's doing 15, that's a good feedback loop. That's a good thing for you to say, what did I not expect that's happening here? And you might see, oh yeah, she's triple booked. She's on 4 other programs and these other project managers are expecting more time from her. I should have known that. I should have accounted for that in my forecast. And so now with that feedback loop, she might change the rest of the duration to 15. I actually don't think you should change history. Keep the allocations of what you forecasted before. Again, so you learn about that and you get better at forecasting. A lot of people that I've seen, project managers, program managers, producers, who got to take this role and responsibility for resource planning for their project on, it takes them a good 6 iterations, 6 weeks before they really get it, where they're not trying to be too precise week over week for one. And then 2, they're actually like taking that feedback loop of a timesheet and saying, what do I learn from what actual compared to my plan was? And how do I apply that to my forecast going forward? Maybe that sparks a few conversations. Maybe that is a collaboration between another program or project manager who's competing for that individual contributor's time. But it's about the feedback loop that's most important. And then Brent said, can you dive into the contrast between DPM and a better way to plan? So to whom her jobs are distributed to, mostly the technical leads. Yeah, maybe I should do a follow-up webinar to that with being more specific. I think that, look, the jobs to be done for a digital project manager, it keeps growing every single year. And it becomes harder and harder to find great people that can do all of these things. One of my favorite quotes, I think it was Einstein who said, don't judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree. In this world, I think a really strong digital project manager, she's in the fishbowl of like project planning, communication, risk mitigation, customer success, communication, that kind of stuff. And the tree is the technical craft that the team is doing. We shouldn't expect her to be really good at SEO or SEM or content strategy or writing code or architecture and this very important craft of being a digital project manager. Those are two different crafts and two different people that gravitate towards those crafts. And so it's almost like we're typically undervaluing this craft of being a strong project manager because we're saying, yeah, let's take our tech leads and make them project managers. Like that's never going to work as well as someone who like really loves and appreciates the craft of being a project manager, and someone who really loves and appreciates the craft of being an architect or a creative director or a content strategist, right? I hope that makes sense. And we are 1 minute left. I feel like I've answered all the questions. I hope I have. If you have any follow-up questions, hit me up on email or add me to your Slack. I love to chat that way. Thanks, everybody.